Good evening. Thank you for joining us. You're watching Live with Faye. We're on YouTube every evening at 8 o'clock. We have a discussion which is aimed at furthering our understanding of issues. I keep pointing out these are not debates, these are discussions. What we do is we bring in experts in various fields who help us understand various angles of an issue better, making us more informed citizens and helping us make up our minds. Of course, we won't tell you, or I won't tell you on this show how you should feel about something, what you should think, and what your opinion should be. The idea is to arm you with as much information as we can. So this is the new format that we're experimenting with on this platform. No opinion, no outrage, no activism, just the information. And of course, you can drop us your questions in the chat window and we'll try and address as many of those questions as we can. Today, we're going to go back to the NCB's case, the Narcotics Bureau's case on Rhea Chakrabarti, her brother, and 4 others that they have arrested. Now, there are 2 simultaneous cases going on in the courts. One is the NCB Special Court that has, as of today, extended the remand of the accused until the 20th of October. Now, Rhea Chakrabarti and the others have been in jail since the 8th of September, which is almost a month now, and is likely to continue. There is a simultaneous hearing taking place at the Bombay High Court, which is likely to give its verdict tomorrow. This is a bail application that's been filed by Rhea Chakrabarti and her brother before the Bombay High Court, and that's likely to have an answer for us by tomorrow. In the meantime, let's take a look at the Narcotics Bureau extending that stay in jail until the 20th of October. Some things that we can note at this point, these Narcotics Bureau submissions before the courts. The NCB has in its affidavit said that this crime committed by the accused is, and I quote, worse than murder or culpable homicide. And this case should be, and I quote again, a lesson for others. This sort of crime, it says, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, is worse than murder or culpable homicide. Murder affects one person or a family. However, drug cases affect the entire society. We are seeing the trend going on in the country among college youngsters. This is a crime where it should be made non-bailable, and therefore the legislature has said that the offence will be cognizable and made non-bailable. The NCB in its affidavit has said that the applications had abetted and financed drug transactions, and therefore Section 27A of the NDPS Act, which provides for punishment under financing of drug trafficking and harboring of offenders, is applicable in this case. The ASG, who's arguing for the government, and the NCB said all people arrested till now are connected with each other and therefore it is a syndicate. This is not a case related to Sushant Singh Rajput's death. He may have been one of the customers, but the entire transaction and the deal is not restricted to him. Considering the brutality of the case and the overall circumstances, drug abuse needs to be controlled in the country and in all sectors, whether it is in college, schools, Bollywood, or whatever. It goes on to say our leaders say that our country is dependent on the young generation. If role models in society are doing this, others are going to follow. Then what is the future of this country? Their health should be in sound condition. We should stop somewhere. We should also have sympathy for youngsters. This should be a lesson for others too. We are not meant for this culture in our country, end quote. So it's very interesting. This is the argument that's been placed before the courts, and we have to ask a couple of questions about this argument. Now, in a previous video, to which you will find a link on this, we had 2 conversations about this specific case, about the fact that if Rhea Chakrabarti, being the live-in partner of Sushant Singh Rajput during the period in which the alleged crime took place, was she a proxy for him? Can she be considered actually a drug peddler or a member of a syndicate if she was purchasing on his behalf and not consuming? We also talked about the amounts of drugs that were purchased and whether they qualify as commercial or for personal use. And now we have to talk about the NCB's arguments before the court. Is this argument that it is worse than murder? Does that apply in this particular case? The argument that Rhea Chakrabarti and her brother were traffickers of drugs, harboring offenders, does that apply in this case as well? To help us understand the law in this matter, joining us right now, 2 voices that I have tremendous respect for. Mr. B.B. Kumar is the former and the first DG of the NCB in India, the first Director General of the NCB in India. And Ms. Karuna Nundy is an advocate with the Supreme Court, who's a very clear voice, not just for women in this country, but simply for the law. I welcome both of you and I thank you for giving us your time. Mr. Kumar, if I may please start with you. The last conversation we had, you said very clearly that you believe that Rhea Chakrabarti would get bail, having looked at the details of the case. That was over a month ago. The young woman is still in jail, sir. What is your response right now to the filings of the NCB before the courts?
Your introduction as well as subsequent framing of the question has three aspects. First, I will mention about the powers of the Bombay High Court. There was one decision of the Bombay High Court in the case of one Prajesh Waghani in 1990, where they very clearly mentioned that the special court for trying offences under the NDPS Act does not have the power to grant bail. However, they said the High Court of Bombay very clearly mentioned that they have inherent power under Section 413 of the Criminal Procedure Code, that they have the power to grant bail in spite of Section 37A of the Act, which clearly is a non-obstant clause, which clearly mentions that no bail shall be granted. But they have given under subsection 2 of the same section that they should give an opportunity to the public prosecutor to oppose the bail. And the second thing they said is that the High Court feels that the evidence that has been placed before it will not give a reasonable sort of confidence to the court that the offense said to have been made out against the accused is not sufficient to keep her in custody. So this is the first law that was formulated by the Bombay High Court, that the High Court has inherent power to grant bail, particularly if large quantities are not involved in this case. As far as Rhea Chakrabarti is concerned, I don't think any drug was seized from her. It started with a small investigation of about 50 or odd grams of ganja, and subsequently certain peddlers were traced, and one of them had hashish of about 500 and odd grams of hashish was involved. And there probably the drug peddlers can be can be detained in custody till further investigation is completed. And they can go upwards towards finding out what's the main source of supply and other things. Now, the second aspect which you mentioned in the affidavit, that this amounts to mass murder and it amounts to sort of making the younger population into drug addicts and make them useless persons, not useful to the society at all. There, that applies to the drug traffickers. The drug traffickers, their main aim is to promote the distribution of drugs. Firstly, to smuggle the drugs into the country or get it converted within India into sort of psychotropic substances which are more harmful than the natural drugs from race like ganja or opium and things like that. MDMA, for example, ecstasy, it's a very dangerous drug. Cocaine is dangerous for the children or even for the adults. There, the minimum quantities specified are very low. For example, in the case of MDMA or ecstasy, it's just 2 grams. That is the minimum quantity. Anything over 5 grams is supposed to be large quantity. They are the most dangerous drugs. And in this particular case, mass murder is definitely a term that is used for drug traffickers because they can convert, if they induce large sections of the population into drug addicts, then it will lead to a situation where probably this drug abuse can lead to youngsters particularly into not very useful citizens of the country and may harm in the longer interest to the welfare of the citizens of the country. That is where probably it will apply, and not to individual cases where they are drug addicts. That is the whole object of the law. Further, the law itself says under Section 67A that a drug addict, if he goes before the court, even if it's convicted, they can release the drug addict so long as he gives an undertaking that he will go to a treatment center and undergo treatment. So he's entitled to get bail and nothing. The next question is, the High Court can grant a person bail if they are convinced that he will not indulge in any further criminal activity, or he will not tamper with the evidence of witnesses, or he will not obstruct the investigation process, yes, and readily available, and he will not abscond and make himself not available for investigation. So those are the certain situations, or he will leave the country, for example, by going to Nepal and from there to any other country and things like that. Then Of course, the High Court can certainly say that, look, you're possibly, or if some evidence is placed to that effect, then they can put strict conditions saying that you deposit your passport if you have one, and then report to the police station and provide a sufficient amount of either cash or other security or surety and things like that. A lot of these things.
Well, let me take this point then to Karuna. Nundy. Ms. Nundy, good evening, and thank you for joining us. These points, which are normally argued as the basis of the defense in a bail hearing, that the accused is unlikely to abscond, is unlikely to tamper with evidence or witnesses, and in this case, we know clearly has submitted to all investigations from all agencies and has been investigated by at least 5 agencies, the various agencies that we know of. Do you find it unusual that she's still being held, the accused in this case are still being held in remand, in jail, not in custody, because the NCB says they don't need them in custody, in lockup? Does it seem to you unusual that the remand has been extended till the 20th of October?
There are a couple of things in this matter, Mrs. Souza. First, the fact that Abdullah Khani and Karan Arora, who appear to be the people who have been accused of possession of 59 grams of cannabis, and through whom the liability of Rhea Chakravarti appears to derive. And I'm only going by the facts that are in the public domain, including from Live Law and Bar and Bench. But those people, those 2 men, the day they appeared before the court, they got paid, right? Immediately. So now it seems strange to me that this young woman, from whom nothing has been recovered, from people that she has, her liability appears to derive from, they are not in possession of commercial quantities. Even they are not in possession of commercial quantities. It's very important, right? And it's possible under the law, under Section 20, for example, that they could be let off with merely a fine. So, given that that Rhea Chakravarti then has been cooperating with the investigation, has been questioned extensively, is not even in police custody, is in judicial remand, right? Why is she being kept in custody at all? Now, if you look at some of the arguments in court, including by the ASG, these are also a bit strange, and that's an understatement speaking legally. For example, one of the things that he said was that Section 27A, with regard to harboring an offender, is to be interpreted as a reporting on your neighbor provision, right? Which is that if you know that somebody else is taking drugs, that you have to pick up the phone and you have to call the police. Now, to me, that sounds nothing, it's nothing short of Nazi Germany. To expect one person to spy upon another and to make them legally liable under an anti-drug prohibition act, under an extremely draconian criminal legislation, if they fail to do so. Now, keep in mind that parallelly, and of course, marijuana, hashish, etc., it's still illegal. But parallelly, what 2 states in our country have done, whether it's Uttarakhand, also to some extent Madhya Pradesh, is that they have decriminalized and allowed marijuana and its derivatives for medical use, right? Now, as far as I can see, one of the things that Ms. Chakravarti is saying is that she, I don't know if she's saying that, but some of the things that have been reported, is that she possibly procured cannabis or CBD oil or derivatives for medical use for Sushant Singh Rajput, right? Now, if she did so, what is the magnitude also? Because, you know, the entire media, except for, you know, honorable exceptions like you, went a bit mad, speaking of drugs, right? What are these drugs? I think it's very important to pass what these drugs are. Now, it's true that cannabis and marijuana are still in Schedule 1, which I think is completely incorrect. That my personal view and strong view is that the High Court is correct in examining the petition of the great Indian movement, legalization of marijuana movement, this is what they call themselves. And they have issued notice to the central government to say that should this be decriminalized and made legal. But at best, the allegation against her is something that is one, of procurement of drugs, possibly CBD oil, perhaps for medical use for somebody who was having anxiety and other mental health issues. And two, that regardless of what those allegations are, that there is no recovery from her at all. And that three, that any allegations against her derive from two people, one of whom is allegedly a dealer, who have got bail at the first instance. So the question is that why is this young woman in jail at all? Now, recently there is the Mumbai police is doing an investigation, and perhaps it has some free speech implications. I'm not going to go into that at this stage, but it's doing an investigation against 80,000 social media handles that impugned its work in the Sushant Singh Rajput case in the investigation, original investigation, right? Now, there's a University of Michigan study that that is also being reported on a bit more, which looked at 1 lakh tweets and the fact that the angle of the Sushant Singh Rajput murder was powered by the BJP and its affiliates. So when we look at this, it's essentially created pressure on the systems, on media, as well as on the legal systems. I think this is something that has already now been established by academics. The greater difficulty, though, is that when the NCB has a staff of, Mr. Kumar can correct me, I think it's about a staff of 50 to 100. And it is meant to crack in very, very important cases that are disabling large parts of our country. Cases of heroin, cases of trafficking of heroin, cases of smuggling of cocaine, or these sorts of cases. That why are limited taxpayers' resources going in to this case? Now, if you put two and two together, and if you put at the powering of the media trial, and if you look at the powering of the, and if you look at the state's interaction with this, whether it's the ASG's argument that she's harboring an offender, this argument has never been made before, by the way. It's completely without precedent, right? That you should report on your neighbor if they're taking drugs. And if you look at the NCB's action there, I think the question I ask myself is why? Why is this woman who is, let us not forget, she is Hindu, she is upper caste, she is the daughter of a senior armed forces officer. And if she can almost completely arbitrarily be made a sacrificial lamb, why is this happening? Are there things that we are not looking at? What is the media then not reporting? Why is this circus being created? Is there an unprecedented economic disaster? The economy has never shrunk by such a large margin. The COVID, people are dying, and we have been impugned for mismanagement of COVID in an enormous way, in a very, very serious way. It's not just an act of God. It's something that has been, internationally, that it's being said that along with the United States and along with Brazil, that there is mismanagement of COVID, and our people have died when they should not have died. And when there are farmers' protests because legislation is being rammed through parliament and democracy, there's a destruction of democracy. Then I ask myself, is this a creation?
Ms. Nundy, just one follow-up question, something that concerned me a little bit was you said that, she's Hindu, she's upper caste and the daughter of a defense officer. Does that mean that if she was none of these things, that she would be free game for those conducting what we may call a witch hunt at this point?
I think let's be clear that if you're in not these categories, then you're far more vulnerable. If you look at the Hathras case, and if you look at the complete lack of justice and the impunity around it, and then if you take a step back and you look at the war against Dalit women that happens every single day, because now suddenly we're all looking at it and we are appalled at the daily rapes, the gang rapes that happen against Dalit women just in UP, but if you also look at other states, also extensively in all other states, right? It's not happening suddenly more now in the last week or so. It's been happening the entire time. and the state is a participant in the impunity. So yes, I'm saying that if a person of such privilege can be acted against for pretty much no reason, you know, then yes, we should worry about what the state is doing in other cases.
A couple of questions I want to bring to Mr. Kumar here, and this is something that has actually concerned me. A lot has been said about CBD oil. We understand that the manager in question, who's currently in custody of the NCB, the celebrity manager, who was apparently sourcing this oil and handing it over to Rhea Chakrabarti. This CBD oil, or what is otherwise known as, from what I understand, hemp seed oil, is, Mr. Kumar, widely available online on very popular e-commerce websites for as little as 400 rupees. And I just ran a random search. I would share it on my screen, but actually now I'm a little worried about the drug laws in our country as to how this has become narcotics or contraband. Because I'm looking at it, and every big medical store online is delivering it home. Every big e-commerce website is delivering it home. Is this contraband? Are they all breaking the law?
No, it's available in the sense it's in a concentrated form of the active ingredient in the plant of hemp. So it is supposed to be a little more, it's more an active ingredient in ganja. So that's the reason why probably it is procured, so that it gives instant kick rather than ganja, which takes a little time before it gets into the activity in the brain itself. So that there it may take some time. This may take probably immediate action. But as the BBC said about the drug situation in UK, they said it's as easy as getting a pizza from a Pizza Hut or some other source. So that is the way it is done. But I would rather support the legal arguments put forward by Ms. Nundy, the senior counsel at the Supreme Court. I want to bring to your notice, and also probably Ms. Nundy may be aware of that much more than me. There was a recent judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of one Sujit Tiwari versus Union of India. It came just in January 2020. It's a very recent case where heroin of 1,454 kilograms were seized from a ship called MV Henry, where the name itself of the ship was changed. His brother was the captain, Suprit Tiwari, and there were 7 crew members who were also seized. Then the brother, who was on the shore and probably was in Porbandar, he was framed by the NCB, kept in detention for 2.5 years. And then he has applied for bail. Supreme Court said, what is the evidence against this man, who is a B.Tech, who is an engineer? The evidence is one, WhatsApp messages. The other is the statement given before the NCB. Then they made very important points. They said, under section 67 of the Act, if a statement is recorded before the NCB officer, whether it's admissible in evidence or not, is before the larger bench of the Supreme Court. So in other words, even in Rhea Chakrabarti's case, I had the benefit of seeing the remand application. There they have not said, they only said, the NCB only said that they're causing further investigation. They never said she's going to interfere with the investigation. They never said that she's going to tamper with witnesses or any of those, or that she will be away and she will not be available for investigation. She will be absconding and things. No such negative vibes were incorporated in the remand application. So that being so, the statement that was recorded from her based upon her own admission or coerced admission, whatever it was, and the WhatsApp messages itself will not constitute any evidence which will be sustainable. In this case, Supreme Court granted bail to the person who applied for bail, that is the brother who was onshore, who is an engineer and other things. They put strict conditions. They said he must report to the police station either in Porbandar or if he's in Calcutta. I don't know, for job wise, probably is it Calcutta. There he must report. He should be made available. They asked him to pay 10 lakhs. They asked him to deposit his passport. So many other conditions they put. So having put strict conditions, he was granted bail, and they said they disputed the statement because it's before a larger bench, whether it's admissible or not. Then the second thing they said is WhatsApp messages itself are not sufficient to keep this man in bail. And there was no evidence that he was involved in his brother's activities, who was on a ship. Whereas this chap is an engineer and onshore. So that judgment is a very recent judgment, and which will have a lot of impact if probably counsel for Rhea Chakrabarti brings to the notice of the Honorable High Court. And as I mentioned earlier, the Honorable High Court has full powers to grant bail even in the case of NDPS offences, apart from invoking 439 of the Criminal Procedure Code. So whereas the special judge of the NDPS court, he doesn't have the powers. So that being so, it will be very fair if the Honorable High Court of Bombay relies upon their earlier decisions and bail is granted to this unfortunate woman who has been made a soft.
Just to recap what you said, you did say that the Supreme Court has noted in the past, in a different case, that WhatsApp messages are not adequate to determine culpability. Is that correct?
And particularly the statement. It should be corroborated by some other independent evidence. So statement itself is valid or not is before a larger bench of the Supreme Court. So at this, it's dicey.
Right, and Ms. Karuna Nundy, this was an argument, in fact, that Mr. Arima Sundaram made, shared with me in a previous show, where he said that you can't run just with WhatsApp messages, because how do you know she was typing those messages? How do you know Sushant Singh Rajput wasn't using her phone on her behalf? And Mr. Kumar, you're pointing out that the WhatsApp message by itself is not enough. It has to be corroborated with other evidence that the NCB doesn't seem to really have.
I think the existence of a WhatsApp message by itself needs to be proven, right? Because at the initial stage before the trial, have you obtained it from the phone of the accused? For example, that's one thing, because in what Deepika Padukone was accused of was WhatsApp messages, which was on a group, and so it wasn't even obtained from her phone. So that's important. If it's obtained from the phone of the accused, then have the requirements of Section 69 been followed? But in any case, are they in consonance with Article 23, which is the right not to incriminate yourself, right? And this is really important. Also, as Mr. Sundaram, quite correctly said, a number of other theories could also be sort of a part of those WhatsApp messages. But I think the most important point here really is that what she is accused of appears really to be entirely derivative from the crimes that Abdul Lakhani and Karan Arora are accused of, as far as I can see right now, right? And they got bail for the asking immediately. As Mr. Kumar quite correctly points out, there is a provision in addition to the CRPC, the provisions on Bill 437, 439, which exists in the NDPS Act, which is that the courts, the non-constitutional courts, have to look at whether there's a prima facie case or not, right? But the High Court, as he also quite correctly pointed out, has greater powers. And also in the Syed Mohammed Umar Syed case was the state of Gujarat, as well as in the Superintendent of Narcotics Control Bureau versus Arpami. Courts have also said that, look, at this stage, there are these you can't go in, you can't weigh evidence, you can't go into it in such depth. So really, you should be looking at the personal liberty of the accused, and you should be looking at, have they complied with the investigation, and you should be looking at these aspects very stringently as well.
So I want to read out a couple of the questions that have come in right now from our viewers, because some of these questions are very pertinent. Bharat Rawal asks a question where he says, is it up to the NCB now to be the moral police? Because they're saying things like, which I read out in the beginning, that this is not our culture. We are not meant for this culture in our country. This, this case should be a lesson to others. Our leaders expect the young generation to be the future of the country, which is why their role models should be held accountable. Are all of these, Ms. Karuna Nundy, valid arguments in a bail hearing?
In any law enforcement process, these are shocking and unconscionable arguments. because the particular NCB officer may be aware of the culture in their home. Are they aware of the culture in which sadhus use marijuana all the time? Yes, it is true that bhang is not a Schedule 1 drug. However, bhang during Holi, all they need to go is to, go to a few holy gatherings and they will come across it. It is arguments on culture which cause law enforcement to act in particular against women and more strongly against women who are even accused of these crimes, and to act in much more stringent ways against women who are accused of these crimes, and also to moral police contrary to the constitution and contrary to the law. So I think when, there was there's a saying that when I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun. I would like to amend it. I think when I hear the word culture, I reach even more strongly for the law.
That's very well said. Tanvi D says, take Rhea's case or the Hathras case. The way they're being abused says a lot about the misogyny behind it, and it's very patriarchal, to be honest. Questions really about whether the NCB here is overreaching. And again, I'll take that question because we have to be very clear about this to Mr. B.B. Kumar. Mr. Kumar, you were among the founding members of the Narcotics Bureau in this country. A quick sort of, reference for our audience is if you watched Narcos on, on Netflix, you'll know that the Narcos Bureau that actually busted Pablo Escobar is meant to bust big, it is meant to work with other international agencies to prevent large amounts of drugs coming into the country. Is this an embarrassing assignment for the NCB, or would their talents be better utilized in doing the job that they were meant to do, Mr. Kumar?
See, in the main object of establishing the Narcotics Control Bureau, in NDPS Act, we have very clearly two sets of provisions. One, very stringent provisions against the drug traffickers, and the NCB is supposed to go after them, particularly if they are interstate traffickers or international traffickers, incoming or outgoing. For example, India was a transit country from the Golden Crescent, particularly Pakistan tribal areas, used to come to Bombay and Bombay to other destinations. So also a little bit from the Golden Triangle also. The NCB is supposed to do that part of the work and leave it to probably the police at the state level to deal, their narcotics cell is supposed to deal with this type of drug addicts. It's true that drug addiction is bad. When I used to go around and meet the Chief Justice of different high courts when I took charge of the Narcotics Control Bureau, and make a courtesy call and tell them, for heaven's sake, kindly see that the drug traffickers are not released on bail. And the then Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court, I would not name him, he later on became the Chief Justice of Supreme Court. He said, I don't want my grandchildren to become drug addicts, but I can't tell my co-judges, brother judges, that they should not grant bail. And then I met another judge who was a convicting judge, and he said, your law is very weak. You should have the death penalty for drug traffickers, and which we subsequently introduced in, a little later. And he also said, you must sit in the court if your public prosecutor has to behave himself, and so also the judge will also apply the law correctly, which is very true. But that will all apply to drug traffickers and not to a drug addict. The law is very lenient as far as the drug addict is concerned, and that's what the NCB is supposed to follow. In fact, they should be proactive as far as the drug addicts are concerned, help them to become sort of rehabilitate them and send them to de-addiction centers. And an organization cannot reform the whole society and other things. It's the job of various organizations. So I even suggested that the syllabi in the different courses, starting from law, then in nursing and so many other faculties, social work, the syllabus should be so tailor-made so that the people are made aware of the problem of drug abuse and other things. So it needs a very diverse way of strategy which should be adopted if you really want to influence the society, that they should not fall victims to drug abuse and other things. One organization cannot do moral policing as pointed by Ms. Nundy, that their job is to go after the small drug addicts and then penalize them and other things. That is not correct. That's not correct.
Right, and I do understand that Mr. Kumar has to leave in another 5 minutes. So, quick question to you, Mr. Kumar. People are asking right now, again, if the NCB has extended beyond its brief, and if at this point it is grasping at straws, by extending all of these other arguments into its affidavit, it does that show perhaps a lack of evidence for the case that it's trying to prove?
As far as the evidence, the affidavit is concerned, it's theory. In theory, it is correct, but it will not apply to a drug addict. It applies to a drug trafficker. So that's part of it. The second question, what did you mention? Second part of your question was?
Okay, so let me rephrase the question. That the idea that this is a syndicate.
I got the point.
Does this apply to this case?
Yeah. Yes, the information came that she was probably securing some small quantities of ganja for the benefit of her boyfriend Sushant and other things. But then there's no evidence that she has been financing large quantities of acquisition of drugs and other things, or to resell it for others and things like that. She was almost a living in partner with Sushant, and she was trying to help him in a situation where a person, when he's addicted to drugs, when a situation comes, withdrawal symptoms will come, and then he becomes very violent, he becomes moody, and so many other symptoms will come in. So probably she was trying to help him to procure some small quantity of drugs and giving him. So, and then probably she was taking him to treatment centers also. That was the statement she made. So that is a role she has played, and NCB cannot make her into a sort of a target. What they should have done is take the evidence what she has given, who are the persons what are the sources and other things, go upwards for investigation. That's what they should have done. Keep her, whatever statement she has given, use it as evidence subsequently to prosecute the drug peddlers or higher ups, whoever they are in the hierarchy of supply. That's what they should have done. Not make her a target or other drug addicts as targets. Whoever they are.
Of course, releasing information like this to the press on a regular basis about who's going to be summoned, even before they being summoned, actually kills the trail, because even if someone is in possession, that gives them enough time to get rid of the contraband. Karuna, Nundy, quick question for you. One of our viewers is asking this. If the NCB is producing a theory in this bail hearing before the court, is that enough, or are they required to provide any sort of evidence to justify that theory at this level, at the bail hearing level?
Well, at the NDPS does have an additional provision about looking at the prima facie case, right? So there is room for that more than under other law. So normally, even in bail hearings, the case file is asked for, and the accused informally does get an opportunity to look at the case file, the status report. So usually, actually, the evidence is looked at.
And in this case, in your opinion, have they provided enough evidence?
No.
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no.
Tragically, no.
Last question to you, Karuna, Nundy, is that we've seen the BJP use a photograph of Sushant Singh Rajput in its election campaign. A poster has been released and it's undeniable. It says, "Na bhulenge, na bhulne denge." And like you pointed out, there has been some political activity that has taken place in making this trend as well. That case has received a blow perhaps in the AIMS, postmortem that says that it was in fact suicide conclusively and it was not murder. Do you believe that Rhea Chakrabarti, that the arguments being placed against her release from jail or from prison are politically driven at this point?
I've said this from the beginning, that this is all with an eye towards the Bihar elections. I suspect after November 7th, after the elections are over, that the witch hunt against this unfortunate sacrificial lamb will, at the very least, lighten up, right? Now, if you look also against the DGP of Bihar, who suddenly started running for, suddenly became a political actor, that is undeniable. If you look at the posters, the thousands and thousands of posters that have been released around the issue, it's undeniable that this has been a political issue. But what troubles me much more than that is the subversion of law and order and the subversion of the legal machinery. And I think that troubles me a lot more.
Right. I want to thank both of you for giving us your time and answering all of these questions, Ms. Karuna, Nundy, and Mr. B.B. Kumar. For our audience, please share this video because there is a lot of information here that answers a lot of questions about what is contraband, how the law is designed, how the NCB is designed, and what should ideally happen in a bail hearing. Like I said, the High Court is likely to give its verdict tomorrow on the bail application that has been filed before the High Court by Rhea Chakraborty and her brother. Before I let you go, I must remind you that at 9 o'clock this evening, Suraj Yengre, who is a Dalit scholar, will join us out of Harvard University. This is part of our Pass the Mic series that we're starting on this platform to bring in as many Dalit speakers, writers, journalists, and hand the platform over to them and give them room to talk about the issues and to actually give them voice. We're going to be doing a regular series called Pass the Mic. This is one of those, one among that series. So join us. We'll come back at 9 o'clock. And Suraj has been kind enough to say that he will take questions as well. So we'll see you live at 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.